in this context of where students are being trained to be wage laborers and faculty, professors are being treated as technicians of products. So in this context, could we perhaps see can we see shared governance as that hope, maybe even students being involved in this as that hope where it can be this process can be checked at local levels?
Well, we can hope, but realistically speaking, there are very powerful forces behind this kind of evolution of the education system towards training rather than educating. And this is across the board, across the nation. I hope that something can be done to mitigate this to some extent, but it looks like a lost battle.
Coming back to the issue of shared governance in, let's say, Georgia, can you give us some alternate models where things have worked out differently in any other place?
My most recent experience, like for the last quarter of a century, has been in Georgia.
Yeah, my only experience as a faculty member has been in the South, in Mississippi or in Georgia, and you can imagine that Mississippi is not a lot better. But of course, if you go in institutions that are unionized, then you have a very different picture in terms of the process of what is negotiated between representative of the faculty and of the administration, and typically that leads to better working conditions for faculty and also better education conditions for students. At least this is my perspective. I'm not saying that as Senate moderator, but as a personal opinion. I think when there is an opportunity for collective bargaining through a union, the end result is a much better working institution.
But when you don't have a union, even within the system we have now, it is possible to have a much better faculty administration interaction, much more of a partnership. I mean, it's possible. There are, where is it, Georgia Perimeter got cited for having good faculty.
Georgia Perimeter was
influence.
recognized by AAUP for last year. That was, I think, for greater faculty influence.
And within the state of Georgia, they're under the same structure we are. And I don't think that, well, I know for a fact AAUP hasn't cited us for having developed greater faculty influence. But notice it's influence, not authority, it's not power. The issue with power is that you can exercise it. You can exercise it. Whether you should is an entirely different matter. And you don't have to in most cases. Just because you can doesn't mean you should or have to. And my guess is that the administration at the president, and then he would develop a like-mindedness with his under-administrators, vice presidents and deans and chairs and so forth, that he has been able, or she, I'm not sure, has been able to establish a situation where I've got this power, but I want people to buy in. You guys are stakeholders. You're not just employees. You're not just the left fender man who doesn't have to worry about the rest of the car coming off the assembly line. And my guess is that that's what's been going on there, because they're working within the same sort of structure we have.
Well, one trend, DeKalb College is the newest college appointed in the state of Georgia. It's 2 years old now, I think 3 years old. But it was appointed, and faculty do not get tenure. You're appointed in terms of contracts, no tenure. And that's the newest one. Is this the beginning of a trend? Nationally, if you think in terms of dominoes, what happens in California next happens in Texas and then throughout the South, because these are top-down systems from the top. Other states, I'm from Pennsylvania, the state institutions there have really more tenuous connections to the state. They get some state appropriations, but mostly they get to do with their tuition money what they want. And they are also much more autonomous in terms of their governance. This is also a union state, as are many of the states in the Northeast. And organizations like the AAUP are also the collective bargaining unit for the faculty. Those senates actually do act. They actually do pass motions. And you find it sometimes a little more rancorous, but I think more representative of the democratic process. I don't think you find the democratic process in our governance model.
Now, do you think the declining state funding for higher education has anything to contribute to the scenario?
Hugely, especially in the state. We're top down, and the last two governors have made it very clear that higher education is not a priority. It's not that big an issue because they readily go to them to cut. And then you hear terms all the time in the legislature about those overpaid faculty. I mean, this comes up every legislative session. Those overpaid liberal faculty. I mean, you just hear this refrain constantly, and they don't feel very badly about slicing a little bit more. We faced a 2% budget cut. We're looking at another 3%, according to the president.
3% now,
and
2% probably.
3% now, and 2%. So what do you do? I mean, how does this affect you? We've been able to absorb these, but other institutions in the state haven't. We had a few years ago that every institution in the state had to have a certain number of furlough days. At that time, I asked President Groovy if Georgia Southern really had to have these furlough days to stay solvent. He said, no, we didn't have to, but we have to do it because the system is doing it. There are institutions in the state, higher education, that actually are going to have days off this year that have to have these furlough days in order to stay solvent. And it looks like they still may not be out of the woods. And you have to wonder what kind of education then is going on in places like that. It means that they've been really cut to the bone. Another thing you'll see is that with budget cuts, it's affecting, it goes back to what we were just talking about in terms of what the purpose is of a college education. But nationally, right now, we're seeing with budget cuts, some of the first departments to go are foreign language departments in the liberal arts. We're seeing this as a huge trend if you're reading the Chronicle of Higher Ed or Inside Higher Ed. And although there are fights about it, what's happening is that fewer and fewer majors are requiring a foreign language. And now we're getting to the point where we no longer, if we don't have a foreign language department, well, we're not going to be able to offer that. And it's just seen as, well, we don't need this for further training. Everybody speaks English. So all these forces, economic forces, are tied together.
By the way, on the furlough days, let me point out that we had to take a certain number of furlough days. But this isn't like a factory. Where if everybody takes furlough, the factory shuts down. We were required to take as our furlough days. We got to choose them, but we were required to take, as the dates didn't really matter, days on which we were not meeting a class, which meant, of course, that we were still working. We just weren't getting paid for it. And so we were still doing our job. We just took a pay cut. I'll tell you where we were better off than a lot of state employees at the same time we were doing that. I remember reading about prison guards. They too had been furloughed. They weren't getting paid. They showed up at the prisons anyway because they did not want their understaffed colleagues to have to deal with that situation without the proper staffing. But they were working on their so-called days when they were sitting around with their feet up at home, just like we were.
If they would have just said, look, everybody's going to take a 6% pay cut and just go to work like you normally would have been much better than that, than have to go through all this rigmarole planning for a day, which meant that I was sitting at home doing my work anyway.
Mike and I disagree on that. I prefer the furlough because then my base salary amount on my contract is not
Right.
lowered.
Okay,
Because the 6% pay cut, you're never going to see it back.
I see. Yeah, you're right. You're
It
right.
would have become as well. President Kiel just the other day said that when economic conditions and revenue conditions improve in the state, we cannot expect to have any of these cuts restored. What we're looking at is, quote, the new normal. And so what the situation is going to be insofar as pay, we're in our 5th year now, I believe, of no raises and none foreseeable at all now, period, for God knows how long.
And I have to point out that the AAUP, in doing their national study, found that Georgia Southern is at the bottom in all ranks, comparable universities of its size and of its mission. I mean, in the very bottom third, across the board.
Now, to address these conditions, what's the highest stage that the faculty can take this issue to?
We're not even allowed, literally, we're not allowed to communicate with the Board of Regents. Even.
Exactly. So.
I mean, we're barred from doing that. All communication between this campus, officially, formally, legally, however it is properly termed, is between our president and the chancellor. I don't think our president's even supposed to go to the Board of Regents. He goes to the chancellor, and it's that setup. If we need to communicate with the Board of Regents, we have to ask our administration to communicate with them about something, and then they may or may not do that. But we're having to deal straight with the president, because he is the only entity on this campus who can act.
The only avenue is essentially as private citizen. Through the institution, as Mark pointed out, all we can do is through the Senate make the position of the faculty clear, and then it is taken into account or not. And indeed, we have no avenue to the state level where the actual decisions regarding funding are taken. Now, of course, as private citizens, we can try to essentially make noise and write to elected representatives and these kind of things. In a state like Georgia, I'm not sure it can go very far anyway.